The 42nd floor of the Harrington Capitol building smelled like fresh coffee and wool carpet, the kind of combination that announced money without saying a word about it. It was 9:47 on a Tuesday morning, and Marcus Cole was standing in the hallway outside Conference Room A with a canvas toolbox at his feet and his 8-year-old daughter Ava pressed against his left side, her fingers wrapped around the strap of her backpack, a library book tucked under one arm. He was wearing his work clothes, gray utility pants, a dark navy shirt with the Cornerstone Facilities logo embroidered above the left pocket, steel-toed boots that had been resoled twice. He had been on the building's 22nd floor since 6 that morning, replacing a section of HVAC ductwork that had been causing temperature complaints since the previous November. He had not had time to go home and change before the meeting, and he had decided, somewhere around 9:15, that it didn't matter. He was wrong about that, as it turned out, but not in any way he hadn't already anticipated. The woman who stepped in front of the conference room door was in her mid-40s, tailored charcoal blazer, heels that added 3 inches she didn't need, her hair pulled back in the kind of arrangement that took either a lot of money or a lot of time and probably both. Her name tag read Diana Pierce, Senior VP Corporate Affairs, though Marcus already knew that. He knew quite a few things about the people in this building. That knowledge did not run in both directions. She looked at him the way a person looked at something that had appeared in the wrong place, not with hostility yet, just with the particular alert attention of someone identifying an error that needed correcting. "The maintenance access for this floor is through the service corridor," she said. Her voice was professionally even. "If you have work orders for this level, you'll need to coordinate with the facilities desk. The conference room is in use this morning." Marcus looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. "I'm here for the meeting." Deanna's expression recalibrated. Not rudely, not with visible contempt, just with the smooth certainty of a woman who had managed the logistics of 40 board meetings and understood, down to the square footage, who was supposed to be where and when. "The board meeting," she said. "That's right." She glanced at the toolbox, then at Ava, who had gone very still beside her father with the instinctive social awareness of a child who understood that something was happening between adults and had decided the correct response was to wait it out quietly. She was holding her library book against her chest now, the cover pressed flat against her school sweatshirt, her dark eyes moving carefully between Diana and the closed conference room door. "Sir," Diana said, and her voice carried the particular gentleness that people used when they needed to say something unwelcome and preferred to do it kindly. "I don't know who told you about this meeting, but I can assure you that today's session is a closed-board agenda, shareholders and principals only. There must have been some misunderstanding on your end." "There's no misunderstanding," Marcus said. Behind Deanna, through the glass panel beside the conference room door, Marcus could see the room filling. 8 people at the long mahogany table already, more filtering in through the far door. Someone was arranging water glasses, someone else was distributing printed agendas. The room had the organized, purposeful energy of people preparing for something that mattered, and Marcus had that exact same energy, though nothing about his appearance suggested it. Diana glanced over her shoulder at the room, then back at Marcus, and her professional patience developed a slight edge. "I'm going to need to ask you to step back from this area. If you have a facilities issue, I can connect you with—" "My name is Marcus Cole," Marcus said. "I'm on the agenda for item 3. The edge sharpened. "Sir, I have the complete agenda, and the name Marcus Cole is not—" "Check under the investment notation," Marcus said. "Cole Capital Holdings." Something moved through Diana's expression, a small flicker of uncertainty she controlled almost immediately. She pulled her tablet from under her arm, scrolled briefly, and then went still. Not still the way she had been before, composed and certain. Still the way a person went still when the information in front of them did not match the understanding they had walked into the room with. She looked up at him. She looked at the Cornerstone Facilities logo on his shirt. She looked at the toolbox. Then, in the precise fraction of a second before she could complete whatever she was about to say, the conference room door opened and 3 executives stepped into the hallway, laughing about something among themselves. They stopped when they registered the tableau in front of them, a woman in a charcoal blazer, a man in work clothes with a toolbox, and a small girl, and the particular geometry of a situation that no one had planned for. One of the executives, a man in his 50s named Walter Gaines, CFO of Harrington Capital, 3 years in that seat, looked at Marcus and then looked away the way men looked away from things they had already categorized. He turned to Diana. "Everything all right out here?" "Fine," Diana said, though her voice had lost a half-step of its certainty. "I was just explaining our entry protocol to one of the board principals," Marcus said. His voice was even. Not cold, not aggressive, just precise. Walter Gaines looked at him again, this time all the way. He took in the uniform, the toolbox, the child. The smile that followed was brief and practiced, the kind deployed by men who had spent careers managing situations they found inconvenient. "Right, well," he looked at Diana. "We're getting started in about 4 minutes." He went back inside. The other two followed, one of them pulling the door almost shut behind her. Diana watched them go. Then she turned back to Marcus with an expression that had made a decision somewhere in the last 30 seconds. The decision that whatever uncertainty the tablet had introduced, it was not sufficient grounds to allow a man in a utility uniform to walk into a closed board meeting. "Mr. Cole," she said, and now the professional veneer was smooth again, reinforced by resolution rather than original confidence. "I don't doubt that there's been some administrative confusion, possibly with the investor communications team, but I cannot allow anyone into this room without proper verification, and that verification process takes time we don't have this morning. I'd ask you to wait in the reception area on 38 and we'll get this sorted out after the meeting." "The meeting is the point," Marcus said. "I'm scheduled to present. Then I'll make sure you're rescheduled." Ava looked up at her father. Her expression had the particular quality of a child who had been following every word and had filed it all away in the careful internal record she kept of how the world worked. She didn't speak, she just watched him, as though she was waiting to see something she had wondered about for a long time. Marcus looked at Diana. He held the look long enough to make the silence deliberate, and then he said, quietly, "I'd like to speak with George Harrington." Diana's chin lifted slightly. "Mr. Harrington is preparing for the meeting. Tell him Marcus Cole is in the hallway." "I'm not going to interrupt the chairman for—" "Tell him," Marcus said, "that Marcus Cole is in the hallway. That's all. Then whatever he decides, I'll accept." The request was so direct, so without performance, that it caught Diana slightly off balance. The usual moves available to her, managed patience, corporate process, the gentle redirect, suddenly had nowhere clean to go. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked at Ava, who was looking back at her with those careful dark eyes above the library book, and something shifted in Diana's expression, something she quickly composed again. "Wait here," she said, and went inside. "Before we go any further, let me tell you something. Stories like this one are exactly what this channel is about. If you've ever been made invisible by the very place you had every right to occupy, this one is for you. Subscribe and stay with us." Marcus Cole had a system for school day mornings, and it never changed. He had Ava out of bed by 6:15, breakfast on the table by 6:40, her backpack checked and by the door by 7:10. He drove her to school by 7:45, stopped at the corner to watch her walk through the doors, and was wherever the day's first job was by 8 o'clock at the latest. It was not a complicated life. It was not a life that looked like much from the outside. But Marcus had spent long enough learning the difference between appearance and substance to have stopped letting one inform his judgment of the other. He ran Cornerstone Facilities Partners, a commercial maintenance and facilities management company with 22 employees, 3 service trucks, and contracts across 14 buildings in the metro area. He had started it 11 years ago with 1 truck and a single building management contract for a 4-story office complex whose previous facilities firm had walked off the job mid-winter. He had personally fixed the boiler that first week, in February, in a building where the temperature on the 3rd floor had dropped to 52 degrees. The building manager had offered him a contract on the spot. The company did real work, necessary work, the kind that kept buildings running without anyone inside those buildings ever having to think about the fact that someone was keeping them running, which was exactly the point. Marcus had never been interested in visibility for its own sake. He had been interested since the age of 24 when he watched his father retire from 30 years of building maintenance with 2 bad knees and a firm handshake from a man whose name he'd never learned, in building something that lasted. Cornerstone was part of it. But it was not all of it. The other part was harder to explain, which was why Marcus generally didn't try. Cole Capital Holdings had been incorporated 7 years ago, seeded initially with the modest proceeds from the sale of his father's house which Marcus had inherited, and built over the subsequent years through a series of investments that most people in his orbit would have been surprised to learn existed. He held positions in 3 mid-sized regional companies, one of which was a 12% equity stake in Harrington Capital Partners, acquired during a period when the firm had been quietly restructuring its investor base and in need of liquidity that most of its existing investors had been unwilling to provide. Marcus had provided it, not because he expected recognition for it, because the numbers made sense and because he trusted his own reading of them, the same way he trusted his reading of a building's HVAC system when the engineers had given up and gone home. He had attended every board meeting he had been invited to since. He had attended them dressed differently from today in most cases, not because he owned clothes better than what he was wearing now, but because he had generally not been on a job site before those meetings. Today he had been, and Marcus was not a man who saw the need to change clothes to walk into a room where he had every right to be. Ava had been with him since 6:30. Today was a teacher professional development day which Marcus had known about since October when the school calendar came home in her folder. But the neighbor who usually watched Ava during work hours had a medical appointment that couldn't be moved. So Ava came along. She always had a book. She always had the patience of a child who had been raised around adult spaces and had learned that being quiet and observant was, most of the time, more interesting than the alternative. She had sat in the HVAC access corridor on the 22nd floor for 40 minutes that morning reading about birds, her small legs dangling off the edge of a maintenance platform, perfectly content while Marcus worked overhead in the ductwork. She had eaten her granola bar at 8:50. Offered him the last piece the way she always did, and asked when the building meeting was. Not the board meeting. The building meeting. That was how she had processed the information Marcus had given her about the day. 10 o'clock, he'd told her. Will it be long? About an hour. She had nodded and gone back to her book. That was Ava. She did not make extra work out of situations. She was, in Marcus's considered estimation, one of the finest people he had ever met. They had come upstairs at 9:40. Marcus had set down his toolbox by the wall outside the conference room, straightened his shirt, and walked to the door with his daughter beside him and the particular quality of stillness that people who had been underestimated many times carried in their bodies. Not resignation, not bracing, simply the practiced composure of a man who knew what was coming and had decided in advance how he was going to meet it. He had been right about what was coming. He always was. The conference room that held the quarterly Harrington Capital board meetings occupied the northeast corner of the 42nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city in 2 directions. On a clear morning like this one, you could see the river 30 blocks south and the mountains past the eastern edge of the downtown corridor, blue-white and enormous against the October sky. The table inside was mahogany, 12 feet long, surrounded by chairs in dark leather. A brass chandelier hung overhead that Marcus had personally arranged to have cleaned and rebalanced 3 months ago when the building manager noted it was listing 2 degrees to the left. He noticed these things. It was part of his job. It was also simply part of the way he moved through the world. The practice of a man who had spent 30 years understanding how things worked by looking at what other people walked past without seeing. Inside the room, through the glass panel, he watched Diana Pierce make her way around the far end of the table toward the head, where a man in his 70s was reviewing a document, silver-haired and unhurried, the specific posture of someone who had stopped needing to perform authority because authority was simply what he was. George Harrington, chairman of Harrington Capital, 60 years in private equity, The kind of man who had outlasted industries and still came to work because work was what kept him honest. Marcus watched Diana lean down and speak near his ear. Watched George Harrington set down his document without hurry. Watched the old man's expression do something Marcus could not fully read through the glass, but recognized as the expression of a man receiving information he had not expected. George Harrington looked toward the hallway. He could not see Marcus from where he was sitting, but he looked. Out in the hallway, the door to the service stairs opened and a security guard appeared. He was young, 24 or 25, moving with the self-conscious authority of someone still learning what his uniform meant. He stopped 2 feet from Marcus with his thumbs near his belt, and his expression arranged to suggest control. "Sir, I'm going to need you to collect your equipment and head back to the service level." Marcus looked at him. "I'm waiting for someone. We've had a report that you're disrupting access to a private meeting area." "I'm standing in a hallway," Marcus said. The guard's jaw tightened. He was not unkind, exactly. He was young and had been given a simple task and was trying to perform it without incident, which was all that most people were doing in most situations. Marcus understood that. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Ava looked up at the guard. She had her library book flat against her chest now, both arms crossed over it, her expression the one she wore when she was thinking carefully about something. "Are you making him leave?" she asked. Her voice was not frightened. It was curious in the genuine, uncomplicated way children were curious before they learned to dress curiosity as something else. The guard looked at her. Something in him shifted, barely perceptible, the small movement of a person whose certainty had encountered something it hadn't planned for. "I'm just asking him to—" "He said he has a meeting," Ava said. "We've been here since 9:40. The guard looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him with the expression he always wore in these moments, the one that held no anger and no performance of any kind, just attention. Patient and complete. "Daddy," Ava said quietly. Not anxiously. Just to him. "I know," Marcus said. He was not talking to the guard. He was talking to her. And then, because it was the truth and he wanted her to have it, he said, "We're not going anywhere." The guard stepped back. Not because he had been convinced, not because he was certain he was wrong, but because something in the specific quality of Marcus's stillness communicated that moving this situation toward force was not going to go the way it usually went, and the guard was smart enough to recognize the shape of that. He stepped back and spoke into his radio, low, requesting clarification from whoever had sent him there. 3 minutes passed. The hallway held them the way hallways did. Indifferent, fluorescent, the distant sound of elevator doors somewhere below. Then the conference room door opened. George Harrington was not a tall man. He had been, perhaps, at 40. At 73 he had settled into the particular compact solidity of men who had spent decades being the most substantial person in whatever room they occupied by means other than size. He came through the door with the unhurried movement of someone who had nowhere else to be that mattered more than where he was at this moment. And he looked at Marcus with an expression that moved through several things very quickly. Surprise, something that lived near guilt, something like recognition, and then settled into the direct steadiness of a man who did not believe in wasting time on indirection when the moment called for something simpler. "Marcus," he said. He stopped in front of him and extended his hand, and when Marcus took it, George Harrington held it with both of his, the way people shook hands when they meant something more than the gesture. "I'm sorry you were kept waiting." The hallway was very quiet. The security guard had gone completely still. Diana Pierce had followed George out and was standing 2 steps behind him with the expression of someone in the middle of a calculation that had just revealed an error in the original premise. "It's fine," Marcus said. George Harrington looked at him fully. Then he looked at Ava, who looked back at him with those patient, considering eyes. "And who is this?" he asked. "This is Ava," Marcus said. George crouched down to her level, which cost him something at his age, but which he did without hesitation, and looked at her with the genuine attention of a man who had learned long ago that children responded to sincerity and nothing else. "Hello, Ava." Ava studied him the same way she studied everything. "Hello," she said. George straightened and looked at Marcus. Have you had coffee? Not yet. Come in, George said simply and turned back toward the conference room door. He held it open himself. He did not wait for Diana to open it. He held it open with one hand and gestured Marcus through with the other, the specific gesture of a man who understood that the manner in which he opened a door communicated something no words were required to make clear. Marcus picked up his toolbox, looked at Ava, and they walked through together. The room changed when he entered it. Not loudly, not with the dramatic pivot that the word changed sometimes implied, but the 14 people around and near the mahogany table received the entrance of a man in a Cornerstone Facilities uniform carrying a canvas toolbox, accompanied by a small girl with a library book, ushered through the door by the chairman of the firm himself, and the room did what rooms did when information arrived that required its current understanding to be updated. Conversations stopped. Papers were set down. Heads turned. Walter Gaines, the CFO who had looked through Marcus in the hallway 40 minutes earlier, made full eye contact. Marcus held it for exactly as long as it took for the eye contact to mean something, and then looked away, not with triumph, not with the performance of a point being made, just with the natural movement of a man proceeding to where he needed to be. George Harrington walked to the head of the table. He looked around the room for a moment in the way he looked at all rooms, which was the way a man looked when he understood he was responsible for their character and was always taking that responsibility seriously. Then he looked at Diana, who had come in behind them and was standing near the door with her tablet against her chest and her expression very still. "Find a chair for Ava," he said. "Near the window, please, and see if there's anything she'd like." Diana moved. She moved with the smooth professionalism she had exercised all morning, but the something underneath it had been restructured. She found a chair, brought it to the window end of the room, set it where the morning light fell across the city view. She crouched down and asked Ava what she would like. Ava said water, please, and thank you, and Diana went to get it without saying a single additional word about the morning. Then George Harrington did the thing that no one in the room except Marcus had understood was coming. He walked to the head of the table, to his own chair, the chairman's chair, at the center of the long mahogany edge where he had sat for 22 years, and he pulled it back from the table. He looked at Marcus across the length of the room, and his voice carried without effort the way voices carried when what they were saying was already true before it was spoken. "I believe this is yours today," he said. "You're presenting the item that matters most on this agenda. You should be here." He stepped aside from the chair. He gestured Marcus toward it with the quiet, uncomplicated directness of someone making a statement in the only language that didn't require translation. Nobody spoke. The room held its breath, not audibly, not collectively, but person by person, in the particular way that a group of people went quiet when they understood simultaneously that something was happening they would not forget. Marcus set his toolbox beside the chair. He sat down. He did not adjust his shirt or straighten his collar or make any gesture that acknowledged the incongruity between where he was sitting and what he was wearing. He simply sat in the chairman's chair at the head of the mahogany table and placed his hands flat in front of him and looked around the room with the even, unhurried attention of a man who had always belonged here and was simply arriving a little later in the morning than planned. George Harrington took a seat to his left, the seat of a colleague, not a chairman, and opened his copy of the agenda as though this were the arrangement that had been planned all along. "We'll begin with item 3, George said. Mr. Cole, you have the floor." Marcus spoke for 22 minutes. He did not have slides. He had a folded set of handwritten notes in his shirt pocket that he consulted twice and then put away. What he said was about a real estate portfolio restructuring that Harrington Capital had been considering for 18 months without conclusion. A specific approach that was both legally clean and financially sound, modeled across 4 different economic scenarios using data he had accumulated over 7 years of watching the firm from inside his 12% position. He had spent 3 weeks on the analysis. He had told no one he was working on it. He had brought it in his shirt pocket to a meeting he had nearly not been allowed to enter, and he laid it out now with the same complete and unself-conscious precision he brought to everything else. He spoke the way he worked, without performance, without wasted movement, with the specific quality of attention that belonged to a person who understood that the people in the room were not owed his clarity, but that he was, nonetheless, going to give it to them completely, because incomplete work was not something he had ever been able to tolerate. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment that was different from any quiet that had preceded it. Walter Gaines, who had not spoken since the hallway encounter, asked a question. It was a good question, the kind that came from genuine engagement rather than performance, and Marcus answered it directly and without abbreviation. 2 other board members asked questions. Marcus answered those too. George Harrington listened to all of it and did not speak, which was, Marcus knew, the highest form of agreement available from a man who had spent 60 years speaking in rooms like this one. Afterward, when the formal session moved into its procedural close and the room began to fill with the sound of chairs and papers and the returning ordinary noise of professional life, Diana Pierce came to where Marcus was gathering his notes at the end of the table. She stood there for a moment with her tablet under her arm and her expression carrying the specific quality of a person who had arrived at something the hard way. "Mr. Cole," she said. Marcus looked at her. "I owe you an apology." The words came out with the slightly effortful quality of sincerity rather than formula. She was not reading from a script, she was saying something that cost her. What happened in the hallway was a failure of judgment on my part. I made an assumption based on what I saw and not on what I should have verified. That was wrong. Marcus looked at her for a moment. He thought about his father, about 30 years of being the person who kept the building running while everyone in the building moved through it without ever needing to understand that someone was making that movement possible, about the specific cost of being invisible in the rooms you had the most right to occupy. "I appreciate that," he said. And he meant it. Not as forgiveness exactly, not as absolution, but as the acknowledgement that something true had been said and that he had received it. "Is there anything I can do to make sure the temperature complaint on 22 gets logged properly?" Marcus said. "The work order number is on file with your facilities desk. If the repair holds through the weekend, we're done. If not, I'll need access again Monday." Diana looked at him for a moment with an expression he recognized. The expression of someone recalibrating a framework they had operated inside of for a long time. "Of course," she said. "I'll make sure." At the window, Ava had finished her water and was deep into her book, sitting sideways in the chair with her feet tucked under her and the morning light bright across the open pages. She had been that way through most of the meeting, occasionally glancing up at her father at the head of the table with the expression of a child confirming something she had always suspected, then returning to her reading without comment. She was not surprised, she was simply glad to have seen it. George Harrington crossed the room to where Marcus was standing and shook his hand again, the same two-handed grip. He looked at him with the particular directness of a man who had little remaining time and had decided to spend what was left of it saying true things. "You should have been in this room years ago," George said. "I've been in this room," Marcus said. "Nobody noticed." George looked at him. Then he smiled, a small and real thing. "They'll notice from now on." Marcus picked up his toolbox. He crossed to Ava, who looked up from her book at his approach, read his face, and slid off the chair with the economical grace of a child who had been waiting patiently and was ready now to go. She slipped her hand into his as they walked toward the door. "Was it good?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, just for him. "It was fine," Marcus said. "Did they listen?" He pushed through the door and the hallway opened around them. The carpet and the diffused light and the distant sound of the elevators. The building moving the way it always did, indifferent and continuous and held together by the work of people who were never asked to the meetings. "Yeah," Marcus said. "They listened." Ava nodded once. She kept his hand and they walked to the elevator. And she pressed the button with the particular authority of a child who knew what came next and had no questions about it. Marcus watched the numbers descend and felt, in his chest, the specific quality of a thing that had been carrying weight for a long time finally being set down somewhere that was ready to hold it. The elevator opened. They got in. The doors closed. 3 floors below, on 22, the HVAC system hummed steadily through the ductwork Marcus had repaired that morning, distributing clean warm air to the offices where people were working without knowing, or needing to know, who had made that comfort possible. The building kept being a building. The people inside it kept doing what they did. And Marcus Cole and his daughter rode the elevator down through all of it, together, in the quiet, uncomplicated way of people who had somewhere else to be and knew exactly how to get there. The board voted to approve the portfolio restructuring at their December session. Marcus presented at that meeting too, on time, in the same chair. He wore a dark jacket that time because the morning's work had been at a different building and he had found 15 minutes to change. Ava was at school. Deanna Pierce had redesigned the board meeting entry protocol by then. A simple change, 2 weeks after October. A single email to all building security and reception staff that listed all board principals and investor representatives with clear verification procedures that did not rely on appearance or inference. She had composed the email herself, consulted no one, and sent it on a Tuesday morning at 7:40, which was early even for her. Nobody asked why she had done it. Nobody needed to. Walter Gaines had passed Marcus in the building lobby the Monday after the October meeting, recognized him with the brief and complicated expression of a man rearranging something in his internal filing system, and said good morning. Marcus had said good morning back. That was the full extent of it. It was enough. On a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the meeting, over breakfast, Ava looked up from her toast and asked Marcus what had happened at the building meeting. He told her the truth in the form available to him, that some people in the room had not expected him to be there, and then they listened, and now they would know for next time. "Did it make you mad?" Ava asked. She had butter on the corner of her mouth. Marcus thought about it the way he thought about questions that deserved a real answer. "Not mad," he said. "Just clear." Ava considered this. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes when people don't see you the way you actually are," Marcus said, "it tells you something about the room. Not about you, about the room." Ava ate her toast and thought about that. After a while she said, "Does the room get better?" Marcus looked at his daughter. He thought about the chair, about George Harrington's hands on his, the two-handed grip, about Diana Pierce's email. Quiet and unceremonious, a single Tuesday morning correction that cost her something to make and that she made without being asked. "Sometimes," he said. "If the right people decide it should." Ava nodded, filing it away with the decisive quality she brought to everything that mattered to her. Then she looked at her toast, then back at him. "You have a meeting next month?" "December. Will I come?" "School day," Marcus said. She accepted this with equanimity. Then, after a moment, "Will you wear your jacket?" Marcus looked at her. "Probably." She smiled. It was brief and real and slightly conspiratorial, the smile of a child sharing a small private understanding with the person she trusted most in the world. Then she finished her toast and carried her plate to the sink, and the morning continued the way mornings did. Ordinary and unrepeatable and entirely enough. The most dangerous assumptions we carry are the ones that feel like professional judgment. The most important rooms are the ones where someone decided, quietly and without applause, that everyone inside them would be seen clearly from the beginning. Not after they had proven themselves, not after they had dressed the part, not after someone of sufficient importance had vouched for them. From the beginning, every time, without exception. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories like this one coming.